It's terrible. Dad has passed away. Come home immediately and help prepare for Dad's funeral. This was a phone call I received one day. There was a frantic male voice on the other end. Isn't this a wrong number? What are you joking about? I truly had no idea. For a brief moment, as I was puzzled, an unpleasant memory resurfaced. Could it be the person on the phone was my ex-husband? Realizing this, I straightened up and spoke into the phone. I really have no idea who this could be. Are you looking for my father-in-law? He passed away 3 years ago, you know. I said this to the person on the other end of the phone. What? Then I heard a pathetic voice. I couldn't help but smile. My name is Kristen, 51 years old. Surrounded by family, I live a happy life. But my journey here hasn't been easy, because I am a divorcee. That marriage was like living in hell. After graduating from college, I started working at a company as a new employee. The job was so much fun, and before I knew it, I was already 30. Most of my friends were married and blessed with children. But because of my naturally quiet personality, I was still single at 35. My fate changed when I turned 36. My ex-husband, Scott, was transferred to the branch I worked at. Scott was 38 and single at the time. Capable at work and climbing the corporate ladder, Scott seemed very dependable, and he took a liking to me. We started dating and got married. I quit my job and became a housewife. Living in the countryside, it was normal for the eldest son's wife to live with his parents unless there was a special reason. So, without exception, I started living with my in-laws. My friends who married earlier said living with in-laws was hard, but they were helpful in many ways. I believed and never doubted that life with my beloved husband and in-laws would be the same. But reality wasn't so sweet. My mother-in-law, Holly, said to me on the first day of marriage, Kristen, now that you're married, you're a part of this family. It's only natural for you to do the household chores and to take care of us, your parents. Given your age, we'd like to see our grandchild soon. Yes, I understand. Answer clearly and concisely. Yes. It felt like I had joined a club. But the bond between parent and child isn't built in a short time. First, I thought I'd try my best to be a part of this family, as Holly wished. Then I started waking up at 4 a.m. I prepared breakfast and lunch for my father-in-law, Mark, and Scott, and sent them off to work. After that, I cleaned up breakfast, did cleaning and laundry. I prepared lunch for Holly, and then cleaned up again. I ran errands, went shopping, and hurried back home to prepare dinner. Then, after preparing for sleep, I would always go to bed after midnight. If I cut corners, Holly would scold me. And if I did things carefully, she'd berate me, saying, You're so slow, inefficient. How long are you going to take? Scott and Mark just turned a blind eye to this, and I thought that was normal. In hindsight, I think I was brainwashed. Once, Holly scolded me terribly. I accidentally broke one of her plates. Her verbal abuse at that time was unspeakable. This piece of trash! What joy do you get from doing this to me? Just disappear! I kept apologizing, crying, as Holly screamed hysterically. But her anger didn't subside, and she raised her hand to me. Afterward, she exaggeratedly told neighbors and relatives that my son's wife broke my plate and is trying to drive me out. People who believed her looked at me coldly, and it was very painful. I just wanted them to believe it wasn't intentional. With that hope, I sought help from Scott. But you did break it, right? It's natural for Mom to be angry. Everyone forgets about gossip soon enough. You worry too much, Scott said, not even pretending to be on my side. After learning I had consulted Scott, Holly became even colder towards me. Tattling like a child? How unpleasant. I felt I was going to mentally break down from the snide comments deliberately made within earshot. That's when Mark intervened. Mom, don't say that. Kristen is reflecting on it. It felt like a savior had appeared to me. Holly, rebuked by Mark, clammed up. Then, snorting, she said, I'm going shopping, and left the house. I was relieved. Then I turned to Mark. Thank you, Mark. Scott won't help, and it's been so hard for me alone, I said, tears spilling over. It's okay. You're not alone, Mark said, placing his hand on my shoulder. But in the next moment, he pulled me into an embrace. I panicked and struggled, but of course I couldn't overcome a man's strength. Please stop. Why not? You can't have children with Scott. Maybe it'll work out with someone else. Scott is similar to me, so it's no problem. Someone! Anyone! Help! I screamed loudly. After a struggle, the doorbell rang by chance. Mark, realizing the situation was bad, hurriedly let go of me, and I escaped to the front door. The visitor was Trisha from next door, bringing the neighborhood newsletter. She frowned suspiciously at my face, perhaps knowing the rumor, but I was relieved she came. Thank you, I said, taking the neighborhood newsletter. After seeing Trisha off, I left the newsletter at the door and fled the house. My heart was pounding. I might get scolded by Holly for leaving the house unattended, but I was desperate to protect myself. Since then, I made sure never to be alone with Mark. There was no way I could tell Scott or Holly about what happened. Of course, if I told my parents, they would worry terribly. They were so happy when I married Scott, worrying about my being single. I didn't want anyone to know about what had happened. I kept on edge, thinking everything would be fine as long as I was careful. In this way, I desperately lived through each day and turned 40. But to be honest, I looked much older than my age. Tired, with terrible dark circles, wrinkles, and spots. Every day, looking in the mirror made me sigh. I didn't even understand why I was here. But there was no escape. One day, Scott, who had been off from work, went out. He had been busy these past few months, so I thought it was work-related. But there was a letter on the bed. I hurriedly showed it to Holly and Mark. Holly, Mark, it's terrible. Scott has... I showed them the letter. Holly turned pale and started blaming me. It's your fault! You're useless and can't even have kids. Scott left because of you. Holly hit me while crying. Such an unfair accusation. I just endured, defending myself. The letter had a short message. I'm divorcing my infertile wife because my younger girlfriend is pregnant. I'm leaving this house where Kristen is. That was all. Holly threw me out that very day, without even letting me put on shoes. I was locked out. I kept apologizing at the front door, shocked. Holly, I'm sorry! But they wouldn't let me back in. Then, Trisha, my neighbor, hearing my voice, came out. Trisha had always been cold to me, but seeing my situation, she probably didn't think it was entirely my fault. She invited me in, lent me shoes, and even gave me money for transportation. I promised to return it and went back to my parents' house. My parents were shocked, but welcomed me kindly. When I told them everything, they were speechless, and Mom cried. I thought it was normal. I should have run away sooner. Finally free from the brainwashing, I cried like a child in front of my parents and fell asleep from exhaustion. After resting at home for a while, a few weeks later, I went with Dad to thank Trisha for lending me the transportation money and shoes. What happened? She had not asked anything before, but it must have been on her mind. Dad, speaking for me, told Trisha everything I had shared. Trisha was speechless. She might have thought it was a lie, but having seen the situation herself, she believed Dad's words. So, that was it. I believed Holly's story without doubt. I'm sorry for my behavior till now, Trisha said, tears in her eyes. Having more people on my side felt incredibly good, even though it was just a small thing. After leaving Trisha's house, Dad and I headed to my in-laws'. Just looking at the house made me shiver. Dad gently pushed my back, showing concern. I couldn't run away now. I had people on my side. How reassuring that felt. I rang the doorbell of my in-laws. Hello? The person who came out was a young woman I had never seen before. I was so taken aback by how comfortably she seemed to fit into my in-laws' house that I almost thought I had the wrong place. Dad must have felt the same, hesitating to speak. Is Scott here? Scott? Yes. Please, wait a moment, said the woman. It seemed it wasn't a mistake. Megan, who is it? I don't know, some man and woman? A voice replied, and I clenched my fists. No doubt about it. The woman must be Scott's new girlfriend. She must have moved in after I left. Who are you? Scott said, clearly disgusted upon seeing us. Scott, what's this about? Kristen is your wife, isn't she? Dad said, holding back anger. Realizing who we were, the girlfriend left with a displeased look. That woman just now, your girlfriend? She looks 20 years younger than you. Are you out of your mind? Age doesn't matter, does it? I can't be with Kristen anymore. We can't have children, and it's her fault. Just in time. I was thinking about needing to get these divorce papers signed. Scott handed me the divorce papers. Here, sign it. What kind of a way is that to talk? Dad, it's okay. I stopped Dad and signed my name on the divorce application, already half filled out at the entrance. Tears of frustration welled up, and Scott laughed at the sight. I would never forgive him. That feeling surged within me. I'll submit the divorce application. Oh, do that, he said, leaving the house with Dad. I hired a lawyer and received compensation in the divorce settlement. It was a small amount, but Holly was apparently telling the neighbors she left on her own, and now she's taking compensation money in the divorce. What a greedy woman. But I decided not to care anymore. For me, who had left, the rumors of that countryside neighborhood meant nothing. Getting the divorce settlement didn't heal my emotional wounds, but at least I was free from that house and felt at peace. 10 years later, after finally regaining peace, I received a call one day. An unregistered number. Maybe a delivery service? I picked up the phone. Hello? Then I heard a panicked man's voice. It's terrible! Dad has passed away! Come home immediately and help prepare for Dad's funeral! I was confused and replied, Isn't this a wrong number? What are you joking about? I truly had no idea. It might be a scam. As I was puzzled over it, an unpleasant memory came back. Maybe the caller was... Now his demanding tone made sense. But why should I help now? I owed them nothing. I straightened up and spoke into the phone. Who is this? If you mean my father-in-law, he passed away 3 years ago. What? As expected, a pathetic voice came through, and I smiled. So my father-in-law passed away 3 years ago. I don't know who you are, but please refrain from making such rude calls. I said that clearly. On the other end of the phone, Scott was causing a commotion. At that moment, someone silently took the mobile phone from me. Who am I speaking with? It was my current husband, Stephen. Noticing the disturbance, he took over the call from Scott. Yes, I had remarried about 7 years ago. My new husband, Stephen, is a wonderful man, 3 years younger than me. Despite my reluctance to remarry due to my divorce, I was warmly welcomed by Stephen and his parents, and now I live happily. However, my father-in-law passed away about 3 years ago. That's why Scott's call didn't make sense to me, as his death was the first thing that came to mind. Who are you? Yelled Scott from the phone. Stephen replied calmly, I am Kristen's husband. Kristen's husband? Don't lie! A woman like her getting married? Impossible. Mind your own business. Anyway, Dad has died. Tell Kristen to come back immediately. Stephen moved the phone away from his ear, shocked by Scott's yelling. I was appalled by Scott's behavior, just saying what he wanted and hanging up. Hadn't he married that young woman from before? I sighed. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Let's just ignore it. I had told Stephen everything about what Scott and my former in-laws did to me before we got married. He couldn't believe the extent of my previous marriage's horror, but he believed me, seeing how afraid I was of marriage, and accepted me. I thought I could be happy without worries, but now Scott was causing trouble again. Your ex-husband, just like you described, Stephen said with a wry smile, handing back the phone. I remained silent. I think they might contact us again. How about we show up at the funeral? Stephen suggested. What? I was shocked by his suggestion. But, indeed, if we left it like this, they might find our house and come uninvited. They were not people who understood common sense. I didn't want to meet Scott or Holly, but causing trouble for Stephen and my family was even more painful. After much thought, I decided to go and say my final goodbyes. Stephen found the funeral's location and time, and I got into the car with him. Just thinking about meeting those people made me tremble, but Stephen held my hand tightly, and I felt grateful to have married him. If anything happens, I'll help you. Let's tell them this is the last time we're involved with this house. Yes. I wasn't sure if they would accept that, but having come this far, I couldn't run away anymore. As we arrived at the funeral parlor, I said to Stephen, I'll go in alone first. Stephen stayed a little distance away, watching as I entered. Immediately, I was spotted by Scott and Holly. It was no surprise, as the mourners were sparse, and anyone entering stood out. Hey, why didn't you visit before the funeral service? I've been busy, Scott yelled as he approached me. Such terrible words after 10 years. As slow as ever. Hurry up and help. Guide the guests. Holly also commanded me in her usual way. Fists clenched, I faced the same old pair. I am no longer part of this family. I came today to say just that. What? You've become so insolent. Who do you think educated you for those 10 years? Dad is crying in this casket because of you. Their accusations brought back all those old memories. I was strong, but this was too much. Stephen must have felt it too. It was then, as he approached me, that someone shouted across the room, Kristen? Why are you here? It was Trisha, my former neighbor, calling out with a voice that echoed through the hall. Her words drew everyone's gaze, and I shrank. I remembered Holly spreading bad rumors about me. In this crowd, I was the unreasonable son's wife, prepared to be branded a villain and gossiped about again. I was prepared for that. But, contrary to my expectations, the response was different. Despite everything she went through, she came to say goodbye. How kind-hearted can she be? Trisha, as loud as ever, rushed over to me. Holly was visibly shocked and unsettled by her words. People around us asked, What do you mean? Trisha explained. Kristen was harassed by Holly, and by Mark too. I heard screams and saw Mark attacking her from my window, so I ran over with the neighborhood newsletter. I was stunned. I had no idea she knew and had come to help. Of course, Holly and Scott didn't know either. They turned pale upon hearing this. Scott didn't even try to help Kristen. And before Megan got married, I think, Kristen was kicked out barefoot by Holly. I lent her shoes and transportation money. One by one, the wrongdoings of my in-laws and Scott were exposed. Holly and Scott were speechless because it was all true. I regret not doubting Holly's story at that time and not helping Kristen. We were all deceived by Holly. I wiped away tears involuntarily. Holly and Scott, pale-faced, neighbors looking at them coldly. Finally, the grievances of that time seemed to be cleared. That's not true. Holly began to defend herself, but Trisha didn't allow it. Instead of keeping quiet about the past, you hold on to Kristen still? What a shock. Release her already. Trisha sharply scolded Holly. Holly turned red, speechless, and flustered. Trisha looked at Holly with derision and then smiled at me. I tearfully thanked her, continually bowing. Kristen, forget about Holly and them. Be happy from now on. Trisha said this and guided me outside, as I hadn't even lit a candle yet. That's right, you don't need to light a candle. Let's all leave, the neighbors said as they began to leave the venue. Wait, please, the funeral is about to start. Holly tried to stop everyone, but no one paused. Stephen, watching from a distance, laughed. After everything was over, I ran to him. Having him there was so reassuring. Seeing me, One of the mourners exclaimed, "Oh my, Professor!" Stephen looked up at the voice. "Wow, Olivia! What a surprise to see you here!" He seemed to know one of the mourners. Scott and Holly watched us with a glare. In the past, I couldn't have faced their gaze, but today was different. I looked back at them directly. "Oh, Olivia knows you? Kristen, who is this?" Trisha seemed to know Olivia too. She asked me. "He's my husband." Introducing Stephen, he greeted her. "Nice to meet you." Olivia told Trisha, "You know the big law firm near the station? He's the head attorney there. He helped my son with his divorce. Thanks to him, we got a hefty compensation from the divorce settlement. An unbeatable, skilled lawyer." "Oh no, it's nothing." "Wow, a lawyer! And the head of the firm. You mean like a CEO?" Stephen was overwhelmed by Olivia's words and the country auntie's strength. They excitedly patted Stephen's shoulder as they talked loudly. I couldn't help but laugh at this scene. Their words clearly reached Holly and Scott's ears. They, who usually were quick to contradict me, couldn't join our conversation. Facing a lawyer, they seemingly realized it was futile. Noticing them, Stephen turned towards Scott and Holly, bowed slightly, and spoke. "I could sue for what happened in my wife's previous marriage at any time, but Kristen wants to leave it in the past, so I won't pursue it. However, if anything happens in the future, I won't hesitate to take action. Please understand that." Scott and Holly were shaken by Stephen's words. Further, Stephen spoke loud enough for them to hear. "Excuse us. It's time to pick up our child." "Our child?" Scott reacted to that word. "Yes, I got pregnant soon after marrying Stephen. We had a daughter. It was a challenging pregnancy due to my age, but she's such a lovely child. Who was the infertile one after all?" I mentioned, "Didn't you marry a much younger woman? I don't see her around." "Right now, she's gone home with the kids to have her third." "Oh, maybe you should consider a DNA test." Scott collapsed, perhaps realizing something. Holly turned pale, too overwhelmed to respond. "Shall we go?" "Yes." With that, I bid Holly, Scott, and Mark a final farewell and left the funeral home. Holly, now known throughout the neighborhood for her lies and harassment towards me. Every time they meet Holly, the neighbors scold her, and she has become quite subdued. Scott went to the hospital for fertility tests and was found to be nearly incapable of natural conception. Now, he's embroiled in troubles with his wife. His wife had 3 children, despite being with an infertile husband. Whose children they are, only God knows. I know all this because Trisha told me. She occasionally contacts me, sharing vegetables and even used items for my daughter, treating us very kindly. She always apologizes for not being able to help me in the past, but I am immensely grateful to her for how much she has saved me. Stephen is kind, and his work is going well. I never thought I could be this happy. Even through unbearable hardships, there comes a day of reward. Now, I feel like I can overcome anything that comes my way. I have learned that much from those people.